So welcome to this webinar this evening in Europe and in the afternoon in North America, where we're looking at a new campaign called Teach the Teacher, which is all within the context of a big push by people around the world to try and bring quality climate education into schools across countries and across continents. My name is Nick Nuttall. I'm with earthday.org. And I'm the Strategic International Communications Director, which is quite a mouthful, and I do apologize. So let me try and set the scene a little bit with our panelists here and with the audience out there. We are less than 2 months before the landmark UN climate conference, that's COP26, which is taking place in Glasgow, in Scotland, and hosted by the United Kingdom and the government of Italy. And this comes basically just 6 years after the landmark Paris Climate Change Agreement, which has become the North and the South Star of how countries are actually going to deal with this climate emergency that we find ourselves in. We need every part of this Paris Agreement to have stepped up ambition at COP26 in November. And the good news is that we know some things are actually moving in the right direction. Renewable energy, so wind and solar power and other forms of renewable energy, are doubling every 3.5 or 4.5 years. They've achieved the equivalent of what they call the Morse code, which is the doubling of transistors in computers. We have achieved exponential growth now with clean energy. That's great, and it will meet its part of the Paris Agreement. We have the electrification of transport moving very quickly. We have also about 1,500 organizations ranging from pension funds to asset managers to banks, with about $150 trillion worth of assets under their control, now committed to the decarbonization of the global economy and delivering what people call the green economy. But there are many, many other areas off track, and we need every bit of the global economy. We need every part of society pulling in the right direction. Agriculture is way behind the curve. Buildings, the places where we live and where we work, are stubbornly 38% of global greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions around the world. And this isn't good. And we have this huge elephant in the room, which is that under the Paris Climate Change Agreement and under the original treaty of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change from 1992, where governments promised to deliver climate education to citizens, to the public, we simply have not moved far enough along this curve to actually say we've achieved much at all. We at earthday.org launched just a year or so ago a campaign to try and basically encourage governments to meet their responsibilities in terms of climate education. And we are focused on COP26 to try and get all governments there to make a big step up in ambition. We would like to see compulsory climate education for every child. We'd like to see this assessed in some way, and we'd like it to be linked very strongly to civic engagement. And we also feel the rich countries have a responsibility to help the poorer countries achieve this. We're delighted that in this campaign, 550 organizations are involved, women's groups, development groups, green groups. We're very pleased to have, for example, the International Trades Union Confederation with its 200 million members and the wonderful head, Sharon Burrow, and nearly 33 million unionized teachers who are under the umbrella of Education International, led by the equally wonderful David Edwards. Okay, that's the context of why we're having this webinar. We have some super panelists in the session, 3 in fact. And first, I want to hear a little bit from Aishwarya Putar, or Putur. You must help me with that, by the way, Aishwarya, who is the project coordinator of this new initiative called Teach the Teacher. Now, we're going to go a bit into this in a moment, but tell me a little bit, Aishwarya, who you are, where you're from.
Okay, yes, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Aishwarya Putur, so it's pronounced Aishwarya. That's for you, Nick.
Thank you very much.
No worries. And yeah, I use she, they pronouns. I'm a climate justice activist located in so-called Canada on traditional Indigenous territory, and I'm 16 years old, so I'm in grade 11. And so I work with a few grassroots movements and organizations like Fridays for Future Digital, Banking on a Better Future, Climate Strike Canada, and of course, Teach the Teacher.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Let me now go to Josh Triegel, who is campaign coordinator for Mock COP26 and an international campaign coordinator at Teach the Future. Josh, just tell us a little bit about you. Where are you coming in from?
I'm joining from London in the United Kingdom, and like Nick said, I'm involved in Teach the Future, which is a campaign for compulsory climate education here in the UK. So it's very much focused on campaigning for our national curriculum, for the government to mandate that schools and students in schools have to learn about climate change. And then Mock COP26 was an event that happened last November, filling the void left by the postponement of COP26 with an online but entirely youth-led and youth-represented conference following and mirroring how COP26 operates, but we produced our own treaty that was signed by the over 330 youth delegates from over 142 countries.
Great, Josh, thank you. And last but not least, we're absolutely delighted to have Dominique Bernier. Dominique, you're a teacher. Tell us who you are, where you're based right now as you're coming into this webinar, and why you're interested in this topic.
Actually, Nick, I'm not a teacher. I'm a union advisor. I work for the CSQ, Centrale des Syndicats du Québec, in Montreal, Canada. My organization regroups 200,000 members around Quebec, the province of Quebec, mostly teachers, and also support staff in education and professionals in education too. We also have a small health sector, but today we're concentrating on the education, so that's why I'm here. And I'm in charge of the environmental and just transition issues at the CSQ. And also we have a huge movement called Movement ACT of teachers and support staff involved in educating towards a viable world. So they are actively involved in sustainable education around 4 values: ecology, pacifism, solidarity, and democracy. So they work with children and young people around these issues.
Okay, fantastic. Well, you know, Quebec has always been a very interesting province in Canada. When we had some of the dark days a few years ago with a slightly different administration, it was Quebec that was standing strong on a lot of environmental and climate issues in very interesting ways. So congratulations to Quebec, that's all I can say, for keeping things moving during those difficult times, under the Harper administration, I think it was called, Right. So let's have a little look into what is this Teach the Teacher campaign. Maybe Ashvara, you can tell us a little bit about what are you trying to achieve? I understand this is happening now at the end of September, maybe also in early October. What is it all about? Give us a heads up.
Yeah, so basically Teach the Teacher is a global international campaign, as Nick mentioned before, and it's a shared campaign run by successful climate groups such as COP26, SOS UK, Teach the Future, etc. And so basically what we're trying to do is bring light on the state of climate education and climate training for teachers in countries across the world. And so we're trying to bring in students from hopefully over 15 countries to go into their own schools and present a presentation and start a holistic, open-ended conversation about our climate justice, eco-anxiety, how to deal with it. And we'll also be talking to them about how to implement climate education within subjects that normally don't talk about climate, right? And so, for example, let's take economics or a business course in high school. We can talk about just transitions towards renewable energy and what that would look like for countries across the world, as well as we could talk about what this just transition would mean for workers who are working in fossil fuel companies. So there's a lot to go off of here. And although our title may be misleading, we're not trying to teach teachers. We're trying to have this conversation with them and open up that discussion with them in order to allow youth voices to be heard, because, you know, I think teachers often want to know what their students want to learn, and this is what we want to learn. We want to learn about our future. We want to learn about our present, and that's exactly what Teach the Teacher is trying to achieve.
Okay. Josh, from your perspective, what are you hoping for from this Teach the Teacher?
Well, I think one of the key reasons that it initially started was that research that Teach the Future conducted in the UK showed that 70% of teachers felt ill-equipped to talk about climate change in lessons, which is a really staggering statistic, that only 30% of teachers feel able to include climate change in any of their lessons because they don't want to get it wrong, or they don't feel like they've been equipped with the skills needed for it. So that was really the catalyst for wanting to do this, was to provide teachers with the confidence to include this into lessons. And so actually through the process of doing a Teach the Teacher session, we make it really clear that actually it's a continual learning process. If you knew everything about climate change right now, it'll be out of date in a few weeks' time. So it's not something you have to be an expert on all of the time to have the conversation. You just need to feel comfortable starting the conversation. And overwhelmingly in the UK, teachers think that climate education should be compulsory. We found it was 98%, which is an overwhelming majority. So despite this massive pressure from teachers to think that it should be in the curriculum, 70% don't feel able to include it.
Dominique, in your perspective in Canada, do you get any feedback at all from teachers, you know, on the teaching profession, that they feel a bit vulnerable on this topic, actually teaching it? Do you hear any of this kind of stuff from people?
Yes, they do feel vulnerable for many reasons, mostly because they don't really know sometimes how to handle the eco-anxiety while telling the truth, you know, because they don't want to tell lies to the kids, especially when they're younger. It's an issue, and when they grow up and they become students on higher levels, it's an issue too, because they feel that very deeply, and the teacher do feel that too, but they don't really know sometimes how to handle these feelings that are legitimate. Education International launched a survey last year to understand what is lacking, what is missing, and for the teachers to teach about climate change. And what we found is that the motivation isn't lacking. That's for sure, and that's what I understand from my work too. A growing number of teachers and sports staff are really, really motivated, and they find it is crucial to teach about these topics. Sometimes what is lacking is the support from the direction of the schools, and also a time frame, you know, especially in secondary school and in high school, each teacher has its own discipline, and it's hard to find. It doesn't fit in the curriculum sometimes, and the government doesn't, especially in Quebec, it's not part of the curriculum. So the teachers do not know where to put it because the workload is so high, so heavy. So that's some of the challenges they face. But at the CSQ, what we do is that we help teachers integrate these topics in the curriculum as situations of learning. You know, as an example, in French, you can write text about some of these topics to understand more in science too. In English, in many disciplines like that, they can do that. And we, as a union, we provide material to do so, as well as tools, online tools, to help them integrate these topics in their work. But and also in the school, because it's one thing to teach about climate change, but it's another thing to involve the students in really acting on the transition of their school to make it zero net. Net zero carbon, sorry. So that's one thing we do too.
Zero net is a good term. That's where we all have to aim. Net zero or zero net in in 2050. That's a good term too. But I just wondered, I mean, is another risk that a teacher faces, and I mean, maybe Dominique, you have some insight in this, but maybe Ashvara, you have an insight too, because one understands that, I mean, okay, so there are some parts of the world or some countries where, you know, it's all pretty clear that nobody has any kind of question mark over whether climate change is happening. You know, there's no question mark that it's something that needs to be addressed. I mean, there may be some people say in the UK or in Germany where I live these days that are not sure that this is really relevant, but I think the vast majority of people in these societies have a sense that something needs to happen. But then if you're in certain provinces in Canada or certain parts of the USA, you know, this can be a big issue, right? Whether climate change is happening or not. And I suppose it's a question of how the teachers feel in those communities about, you know, teaching this subject. They need some support in a sense, don't they, on that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I cannot speak for Alberta or Saskatchewan because I live in Quebec, and it's a different curriculum. It's a different story totally. But even in some parts of Quebec, you know, some teachers are not really familiar with what's happening, or they don't estimate well the urgency of the issue, maybe. Even our prime minister told a few weeks ago that the environment is really important, you know, but what about the economy? Not at any cost, you know. So we have a lot of work to do still to inform the population, and teachers are part of the population. So some are very, very informed and are very active on the subject, but others are less active. So that's part of what I do too. It's part of my job to help them learn about the subject and get more informed and aware of what's happening.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting for me. I mean, I work for 13 years or more with the United Nations in both the environment part of the United Nations and the climate treaty part. And when you live in these kind of bubbles like the UN, right, releasing reports on the science of climate change or the economics of climate change or blah, 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 you think everybody knows about it because it's in all the newspapers, right? I mean, the fact is the global economy is going to suffer if climate change happens. But in fact, the global economy would be better if we actually became sustainable and decarbonized our economies. I mean, all the evidence is out there. And yet, you know, people still ask, and politicians particularly, still go, yeah, is it a trade-off between environment and the economy? Well, actually, no, all the evidence is it's a win-win all the way around if we actually do something about this. But, and you wonder whether this is where the education story comes in, because if it was compulsory education and as across all topics, across all subjects, was woven across the entire curricula, that then people very quickly going through school and very quickly becoming adults are suddenly part of the citizenry that understands this is not a burden, but actually this is an opportunity for a very, very different and rather better world. I mean, Josh, is that how you talk about it yourself, or?
Yeah, I think I would, very similar to that. I would say that by learning about climate change in schools, if you understand the problem that it is, what causes it and what impacts that drives it, we understand the problem. It's very difficult for us as a generation that will become future leaders and the people this to understand what the problem is we're trying to tackle. We're not going to be as effective at actually tackling it and putting in place these solutions to reach net zero.
Yeah, interesting point. I mean, Ashvara, do you get the same sense that the biggest challenge, in a sense, is to educate the young about actually the fact that this thing is happening first, and then what we can do about it, or how would you perceive this? I mean, are your friends and your peers around you as convinced as you are that we need to take action, or is it still, do you still come across a lot of people who go, there's no problem there, let's go bowling?
Mm-hmm. Well, I fortunately have a very, I guess, aware friend group about the issues around the world. And I think that's why, they're my friends, because they help me out with actions, etc. But I am also aware that not every student thinks the same way, right? And so I think just going off of the previous question that you asked, Dominique, about, how climate change is seen as a political issue, right? I think that's the problem there, because in schools, climate change shouldn't be political, because it's an issue that concerns every single person across the globe, right? It shouldn't be a political issue, but we've made it a political issue. And so in order to combat that, what can we do? Well, we can bring out the science. Well, some people say, I don't believe the science. But when we're talking about education, we're not taking in opinions here. We're taking in facts. If I say, oh, this is my anatomical structure, this is my heart, this is my brain, will you say I disagree? I think I don't think a brain exists like that. I think there's something else in there. You won't. Why? Because that's a scientific fact. That's in our textbooks. And that's what we learn from kindergarten, right? We learn from kindergarten to grade 12. And if you're going to do med school, that's what you learn, right? And so I think it's the same thing with climate change. If we teach students from day one onwards about this issue, and we teach it in a way that not just, I know it's going to create climate anxiety. I know that, but we teach it in a way that sparks hope within them, right? So we teach them about the science. We teach them about how it's a really dooming crisis, and that, our governments are not doing much about it. We teach them about the systemic issues with climate change. We teach them about the intersectionality. So we teach them about the racial issues. We teach them about how it intersects with gender issues. We teach them about how it intersects with 2S LGBTQ+ issues, right? We teach them all of that, but then we round it back to teaching them about movements. We teach them about activists. We teach them about all of these wonderful people and organizations across the world that are doing so much for our environment, right? They're doing this all what for? For a livable future, for them, for the children in those schools. And I think, at least personally, if I was in middle school or elementary, sitting there in class, learning about these wonderful figures, these wonderful movements, these movements built upon community well-being, I would have not joined the activism community out of fear, but rather out of hope. And that's what I always tell people, because I did join the activism community. I did join in, participating in digital climate strikes and participating in campaigns, coordinating all of these things out of fear. I was scared for my future. I was scared that I won't have a livable future, and I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to take back control of my life, right? And that's why I joined. But seeing all of these wonderful people, like seeing all of you here today, gives me so much hope, because that means that there are people out there that are willing to put in that hard emotional labor that goes into this work. And I think that's what young children really need to see, because when we see it, we do get hope, right? Because it's saying that, oh, maybe one day I can be in that position. And it's not just seeing, again, when we talk about seeing movements or activists, it's not just seeing white activists or European activists, right? It's about seeing representation. So it's about seeing women, it's about seeing queer people represented, it's about seeing people of color being represented, because I think in schools generally, even talking about historical figures, we often just focus on like white figures, at least in my education, and it is kind of concerning, because as a brown woman growing up in North America, I want to see people like me, right? I want to see that I can achieve those type of stuff as well. And so I think when it comes to climate change and climate education, we really need that representation, and we really need to tie it all back together.
I find it's very interesting that Aishwarya is talking about hope. Sorry, Nick, Twitter.
No, it's okay. Fine, carry on.
That's the key. That's the key thing in what we're trying to help the teachers with, because hope is the key to education in a global sense. And when you talk about topics as serious as climate change and what's going to happen to the world as a result, hope is fundamental. And one thing to achieve that we found in our practice is when you help students act on whatever levels are at their disposition to make change. Yeah. So it cannot be only theoretical. You have to bring the children and the teenagers outside and help them act on their environment. It can be, can be many things. It can be gardening, it can be planting trees, it can be picking up trash, it can be activism, political activism towards the elected people. It can be anything, but it has to translate in the real world. It has to come out of the classroom, and the youth has to see the results of what they're doing. They have to see that they can have a real impact. And in that sense, what we've seen in the last 2 years since before the COVID, with the youth that was very mobilizing around the issue was really, really interesting and bringing hope to even the adults, because it's so encouraging to see that a generation is rising to change things so we can have a better future.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that I think, just to close maybe this part of the chat, there should be no excuse for any single government not to accept the science and therefore make sure that at least the science is communicated in school, because there is something called the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they do these massive assessments. And these scientists that go to make these assessments are actually handpicked by their own governments to attend. And they sift through not news, they don't make new science, they cover the peer review of the peer review of all the peer-reviewed papers. They create their assessment. Again, all the scientists handpicked from governments from both poor countries, middle-income countries, rich countries. And then their reports are signed off by governments. So the whole process is about, meant to be about ensuring that there is buy-in from governments that this science is strong and credible. So I think that there should be no excuse for any government not to allow the science to come into the school. And I would also say on the issue of hope, which was something I was trying to do at the beginning a little bit, because there are some things going very well. Renewable energy is a standout, extraordinary achievement. The fact that wind power is now, cheaper than coal, and solar is in many countries cheaper than coal, and in those countries where it's not, almost. So there's a lot of positivity. The fear, I think, for anybody, whether you're a child or an adult, if you know anything about it, is we're so far behind what we should have done a long time ago that we're on a very close edge here right now. And I think that's where the fear might come in. Look, let's look a little bit at a couple of other things. But first, I'm going to ask Halsey, just out of curiosity, any questions coming through from your end? Anybody wanting to ask us anything? If not, we'll go back to our great conversation. Halsey, are you with us? No, he's not. Oh, Halsey, you're there.
I'm coming in from the background. We've got a few, Nick. I'll put them in the chat, and you can sort through them as I...
Can you ask them, Halsey? We'd like to hear you ask them. It's boring to have it from the chat.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've got one question from John Knox about prioritizing educational topics, and saying, if we destroy our habitat through ignorance, what's the use in learning the other subjects? So how about that balance?
If we destroy habitats,
what's the use in learning the other subjects?
Oh, I see what you mean. So he's basically saying that climate education or environmental education is important, I presume. Okay. Okay. Yep. Yes, right. I think it's worth agreeing with John a bit that if we completely trash our planet, then there's very little point in being a good mathematician, because nobody will be particularly interested. I think maybe he's coming from that angle. What do you guys think? yeah, people think maths is important. People think that physics is important. Yeah, they're all important. But if we don't know about how to take care of our planet, then whether we learn the arts or we learn how to run like an Olympic athlete, it's going to be slightly pointless, isn't it? Because the whole world will come to an end and those skills will be rather irrelevant. I mean, just to be very controversial. Anybody agree with John, if that's what John was asking us?
Yeah, I think it's really important that maths incorporates climate science. People who do maths might just be doing maths because it's fun. I enjoyed maths. It's probably a controversial statement there to have said that I found it fun.
No, it's like you're coming out of the closet there, Josh. You admit that you actually like doing maths, you know. But anyway.
Yeah, yeah, but I think if you're doing maths, it's because you want to go into science, and actually science needs to play a really key part in the transition to become more sustainable. Engineering, innovation, all of those sorts of things are going to play really key roles. So understanding climate change through that subject is really important.
Yeah.
I would say that, I mean, every topic is important in school, but environmental science should be transversal. It should be brought into any topic, because you can talk about, as I said earlier, you can teach history while talking about climate change. You can teach maths, science, French, English, and many other topics. So
yeah,
I think we shouldn't throw everything out, but we have to learn to think society differently, with a more sober angle, and that must be brought everywhere in school, in my view.
Yeah. Halsey, anybody else interested?
Berku from Istanbul. I think this is more for Ashwarya and Josh, but she would like to know how to keep hope among students in the climate crisis era. How do you stay motivated in doing your work?
Yeah, so how do we keep the hope up in what is a curious world right now? Because I mean, there are some parts of the world where, you know, actually it feels a bit more like normality right now. If you're in parts of Western Europe, you wear a mask to go shopping, but the rest of it seems quite straightforward. You can go to the pub, but I talked to somebody in Thailand the other day who hasn't been to the pub for 12 months. Maybe he got thrown out and they won't let him back in, but I think it was to do with COVID-19. So, I mean, Josh, yeah, how do we keep the hope alive for the student movement?
I think climate change should make people feel concerned. It is a concerning thing, but for me, getting involved in activism and in student movements is what gives me hope, because to see how many other people there are that are united behind trying to tackle the problem, and just the collective action and advocacy that you see in these movements, I think is a really important step for overcoming eco-anxiety. I think it is natural to be concerned, but by having this action, it just helps unite, and it makes you feel like you're doing something positive. So I think turning that concern into agency is a really important step for that. And that's, for me, what gives me hope, is seeing how many people there are pushing.
Yeah. Yeah, my girlfriend is a German activist here in Berlin, and she goes on many demos, and I sometimes think, and she goes, no, you have to get out there and show your face. You know, you have to show your face. Those in power need to know that there are people out there that want to show their face on this issue. So I think activism in all its forms, whether it be a demo, whether it be challenging the system in some ways, because the system on climate education clearly is out of sync with the reality and out of sync with time, is really important. Ashwara, do you want to come in on any of that? Did you hear any of that? Or there was a question there from a youth activist in Turkey, which was, how do we keep the hope alive? Josh answered it, but if you want to say anything, that's fine too.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry for going out there a bit. I have a little sister who just came in.
It's okay, she can join in too. We don't have a problem here. Very inclusive.
Yeah, for all hope. Okay. I think hope is a huge word, and I think movements like ours, like the climate movement, cannot thrive without hope, right? And I think hope is any movement, literally, like the climate movement, the social justice movement against racism, right? Black Lives Matter, any movement requires hope. And the way we can keep it going, I feel, is through seeing each other. And I know I said this before, but I really do mean it, because for me, I base my activism around community building, around peoples, around connections with one another, right? Because that's how we make a better world. Without empathy, without understanding one another, we'll never get to the point where we want to live in harmony or we want to be accepting of one another, right? And so if you're able to look at another person, look at a person who is doing something for the environment, like you just mentioned your girlfriend, right, who does demos, like activist demos out in public. And so that for me is hopeful, because I see a person out there. I just heard about them right now. But for me, that's hope. They're going out there, they're showing the world that, hey, this is wrong, and that's amazing, right? And so, like, I think hope comes from each other, and hope will only come from each other. Hope is not going to come from, I don't know, some random politician. That's not going to happen, right? Hope is from people, is from people power. And how do we convince politicians? How do we get people in power to change? Well, that's from people itself. That's from the public, right? So again, hope is within people. And I think that's where we can ensure that hope is thriving.
So then, just before I come back to Halti, let me ask you then all one question, which is that a question would be that if we had climate education in every school in the world, then every year, aged 18, in some developing countries, it's a little bit younger. And of course, there's this terrible thing that 132 million, girls around the world are not being properly educated, full stop, right? But if we get everybody educated, right, then we would be turning out every year a new group of people that would understand the challenge, and they would be arriving at voting age, right? And they would make the kinds of votes and vote in and vote out those with poor policies on what probably is the most central issue to every human being over the next at least 100 years. So again, is this an argument for climate education? It's not just about dealing with this anxiety. It's not just about understanding the risks and hopefully then contributing to the economy in a sense with the solutions, but it's also about surely the political activism or the political side, because people vote for all kinds of reasons, right? For all kinds of people, for all different things. But if well-educated people are in the citizenry, then they can hold their governments better to account.
I completely agree. In fact, this was actually a point I brought up. I did a speech for Mock COP26 on climate education. This was exactly what I brought up. And that, so if we break it down to the core, what is education, right? Why do we even teach people? Why do we educate people? We educate them in order for them to become informed citizens, right? To become better human beings, right? To make decisions once they're out of school or even within school, to make those little decisions with logic and understanding, right? And so when we give them this knowledge of climate education, not only are we sending them out in the world as an informed citizen, but we're sending them out with such a crucial part of our existence. It's if we don't have climate education, how will we even live in the future? What are the decisions that we're going to make, right? And so when it comes to voting, exactly as you said, they are going to vote for leaders who will actually put out change, not just talk about it like leaders currently are, but actually put out change. And so, yes, I believe, again, we have made climate change political, unfortunately, but it is something. Climate education does lead to better policies, it leads to better understanding, and it leads eventually to a better world. And I think that's why everything ties back together to climate education. And also, just another quick point, but I mean, education is a privilege. We're all aware of that, right? And climate education is a whole other level of privilege. And I think that's something that we all need to understand, because a lot of places around the world, again, I come from South Asia, right? I am Canadian, but also my family comes from South Asia. So I'm aware of the state of education in a lot of places, right? And for some people, just being able to get that education, to go to school, is huge. And so when we're talking about climate education, and a lot of people point out, oh, okay, but why doesn't like countries which have like a lot of population like put out climate education within them? Because like, you know, they're putting out a lot of greenhouse gases or whatever. But I don't think they understand the historical context of colonialism and exploitation of resources that has led to the state of such countries, right? And that a lot of those countries, a lot of the citizens in those countries and teachers themselves are battling with being able to provide education to young women, right? And like for me to sit here today on this platform is a huge privilege because my grandmother didn't even get an education, a normal education. She only got it till grade 5, right? And but my mother, she did a master's degree in computer science, which is a huge step from grade 5 to computer science. And now
so these are all good points. It takes us slightly off because if that's the case, the worrisome second argument to that is that we shouldn't even be trying to deliver climate education into the developing world. But I think we should be. And I think governments, the richer countries, as part of their responsibility to the developing countries and the poorer countries, should make sure that not only do they agree to climate education as a compulsory topic, but they provide the resources that can not only provide climate education for the young people in the developing world that need it, but also maybe might contribute to helping to fix some of the broken education systems in those countries as well. So that would be my hopeful answer. I'm just one step before we come back. Halsey, any more questions that we need to ask?
Yep, the rest really fall in the same category, which is how can people get involved? So we've got one from Robert in Malawi, one from Mary Louise in Texas, and a few others. But generally, how can people get involved? We share some links to earthday.org resources. But
well, maybe you could share some links to Mock COP26, Teach the Future, I don't know, Fridays for Future, anything else, and earthday.org. And maybe Ashwari has Education International as well, right?
Yeah.
And Ashwara, is there any favorite link that you would want Halsey to post?
Well, obviously about Teach the Teacher, of course.
Okay, Teach the Teacher. Have we got that one? Yes, we do. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Dominique, you wanted to come back in on something.
Yeah, I wanted to say that sometimes we forget, but climate change has the same root causes as colonization. And what we see here in Canada also is that maybe, I don't know in Europe if you're aware of that, but still in Canada, many First Nation community do not have access to clean water. Canada, an industrialized country, a rich country, best country in the world, as said a former prime minister some years ago, maybe not, but I mean, they suffered from colonization, and today they are the first in Canada to suffer from climate change because it starts in the north. It's more the effects are heavier in the north right now, and still they managed to bring their to share their hope of building something new with the rest of the population in Canada by reclaiming their identity, by reclaiming their rights, and they're actively, even after suffering lots of tragic events in the last decades and before that also. They're still there. They're the first they're on the forefront of the fight for climate change by blocking pipelines, by doing awareness and doing all they can to, as well as fighting against colonization, fighting against the root cause of climate change. So for me, it's really inspiring, and I think climate change education, with this in mind, could help people of color, people in the global south, learn more about why they are in the situation that they are right now, that it has some causes that come from industrialized country, and the way we remove
that's why it needs to be taught. It needs to be taught within the context of social dynamics, history, and all these factors. That's why it needs to be woven across the national curriculum. It needs to be not just a standalone topic, but something that's woven across and there's understanding. And I think we also need to make the point that there are people in the front line right now, whether you're a small island developing state or a low-lying coastal area in many parts of the world, Bangladesh, for example. And but you know, if we don't deal with it, then we're all gonna get it in the neck, right? So there's a reason that we all should be active and be conscious that there are more vulnerable people, but we are all vulnerable. So nobody should feel comfortable sitting in New York, especially after the last hurricane, or anywhere else, right? This is an emergency and should be treated with that respect. We are absolutely, I can't believe we're out of time. I thought that I'd be like, okay, what are we going to ask next? But this conversation has been so free-flowing. Guys, just tell us again, just Josh and Ashwara, teach the teacher. It's the next part of the campaign to get a good outcome at COP26 on climate education. Remind everybody what is happening again last week of September, first week of October, and call on people to get involved. Who wants to go first?
Yes, so I'm happy to go. From the 27th of September, it's going to be students going into their schools, talking to their teachers about climate change, delivering teaching resources. We've got the PowerPoint already. It's hopefully going to get some international press coverage to really sort of build that momentum ahead of COP26 to apply that pressure. So I'd really encourage you to follow on social media at MockCop26, SOS UK, hashtag Teach the Teacher. That's where all of the information will be. If you see stuff, please help amplify it, share, retweet, all of those good things. Try and help spread the message and apply as much pressure as possible for governments to really step up ahead of COP. Good.
And I hope some government ministers show up at some of these schools so they can get a little lesson in what they need to know about, yeah? Good. Indeed. Well, look, we're absolutely right on the edge here. I want to thank Ashwara from Canada, Josh from the UK, and Dominique from Canada too. I hope that you enjoyed this webinar brought to you by earthday.org. And let's keep pressing. We've got less than 2 months to go, but you never know. The doors may open and the lambs might start dancing, the petals might start falling if governments as one declare that the time for flip-flopping on climate education is over and that they're going to actually bite the bullet, grasp the nettle and deliver this into their national curricula in every country, and the rich countries support the poorer countries with that ambition. So without further ado, good night, good afternoon. Have a lovely day tomorrow, a lovely weekend, and I'm sure we'll see each other soon in this beautiful blue world. Thank you.